I'm Deborah Dean, I'm the Visual Arts Manager here at Nottingham Castle.
I'm Polly Binns, one of the artists in Light and Line.
And I'm Anne Morrell, the other artist in Light and Line.
And we're meeting here at the castle today, which is a really, really windy day. And the castle is perched on top of this hill, so you always notice the rush of the wind around the building. So it's quite a noisy day. But we've met to talk about a little bit about your work in preparation for the Light and Line exhibition coming to Nottingham Castle, and also to talk about some paintings from Nottingham's collection that you've chosen to talk about because they strike a chord with you and the way that you work in some way. So perhaps we could start off by, if each of you could say a little bit about your own work and what you're doing at the moment. Polly, do you want to kick off?
Yes, certainly. My work's about landscape, a very particular landscape of North Norfolk. It's literally on the edge of the sea and the land, on the beach and the marsh. I tend to work in series and I work with canvas, exploiting the properties of canvas, painting, drawing and stitching. And the body of work in Light and Line represents this last 3 years, which has been quite significant because I've actually now moved to live in North Norfolk.
And Anne, could you tell us a little about your work?
Well, my work is usually based on looking at water, and water in all the different forms. I mean, the obvious, water, rain, but clouds, seascape, and the kind of patterns left behind. Aircraft taking off leave a kind of plume behind them. Sea coming backward and forward, you get marks on the sand and so on, so that it's like a frozen moment, if you like, where you know what happened, but you're left with this. So,
a trace.
Yes, a trace, that's right.
In talking about the exhibition, we kind of thought it might be nice for you to look at our collection of paintings and select some paintings that somehow spoke to you in a way that related to your individual practice. And I guess it's not a surprise that there are quite a few landscapes in the selection. Our collection is almost 800 paintings, and you've looked through them all online. And what I found fascinating was that both of you independently chose one painting which is the same, in common. Yeah, the picture that you've both chosen is by John Campbell Mitchell, and it's called Wind and Rain, painted in 1907. It's in oil on canvas. So I'm just intrigued by how each of you came to the decision to select this one.
Yes, I think it is intriguing out of all the paintings in the collection, but I think it also perhaps represents how Anne and I have developed a sense of one another's creativity and our interests. For me, what I love about this painting is that it's so classically and horizon divided, and that all the activity is really concentrated in the lower half of the painting, this incredible boiling sea that creates such a dynamic diagonal across that lower half, and this massive great weight of water. No idea where this seashore is, but it epitomises the sort of wild and tumbling massive water that we're so familiar with. And for me especially, I love the way I have the sense that as a canvas it's been painted all over, built very much through the paint. I also love the sense that the horizon is not of great importance, although physically it's of great importance. Because of the tonal values in the painting, we lose the sense of the moment where the world becomes air rather than sea, and equally where the light becomes about the water. And I'm intrigued by the bottom right-hand corner, where this very, very wet, smooth sand really represents that wicked undertow of water that is such a sort of a liminal surface that goes on independently of the tumbling, but is so profoundly part of that tidal activity.
That's really interesting, because it sounds crazy, but I hadn't really thought of the beach. I'm just so taken by the sea and the power of that. What about you, Anne?
I think it does actually reflect the work that we've produced for this exhibition in that sense. I like the way the sky and the sea are one and the same almost. And then at the leading edge of the water as it comes onto the land is this touch of blue, which made me then look at what I really had felt the title was so much to do with the colour of the piece, Wind and Rain. It couldn't be more kind of wind and rainy if you tried, in a way. Then that little bit of blue kind of makes you look at the rest of the piece and realise the grey has got a red to it, and it's actually a more colourful piece than, you know, that at first sight when you see it.
I'm struck as well by, you'd each chosen a painting by William Nicholson, but in this case a very different painting, and he's an artist whose subject matter varied from portraits to still life. And you chose the Viceroy's Orderly from 1915. It quite stands out from the whole selection of paintings altogether, actually. I think it's the only painting with a figure in.
Yes, it's not landscape, but I think it reveals other things that come into one's life and you enjoy and look at. The thing that struck me first about this, actually, was the way the painting had been done from the side. That struck me as very unusual. We're not looking at a portrait front on, which sort of gave it a different kind of take. But I really like it because of the way the fabric has been painted. That is just so of the fabric of India. That light, semi-transparent kind of fabric that drapes so beautifully. And I think that is probably the reason why I chose it.
The treatment of the different kinds of white fabric, his hat and his clothing, and white not just being one solid, unvarying colour. It's many different. There's many different kinds of white there. But that makes me think about your own use of white in your work, actually, and some of your pieces are purely white with stitch.
Yes, I can see that, even though there's no actual stitch in this, but you can see from the piece that's coming down from his turban, most beautifully woven fabric there, very, very light patterns, and I suppose that in a way speaks to me too, that the marking is very subtle.
So actually, having talked about this palette and quite sparse use of colour, it might be quite good to talk next about the other painting by William Nicholson that's been chosen by Polly, called Mushrooms.
I was intrigued when I saw this painting, but also once I'd got my collection of paintings to talk about, I was also aware that there's only 20 years difference between this painting and our first seascape that we talked about, and yet this is a painting so much of the 20th century. It may be a still life, but it's a strange and disconcerting still life. The composition puts the whole weight of the largest objects, the big flat open mushrooms, right at the top of the composition, with the tiny little button mushroom sitting on its shadow, well anchored onto the background. Up on the right-hand side in the top half of the painting, there are these two strange, unanchored, very sculptural, very skull-like mushrooms that seem to hang within the composition. For me as well, because of the sort of flint rocks on the North Norfolk coast, this very extreme white and dark of the structure of the mushrooms makes me think very much of the fractured and broken flints that lie along the beaches, and the fossils that are found there, the echinoids, that are the fossilised sea urchins that are so often battered and broken and have this sort of skull-like quality.
So actually, a lot of the things you're saying there, Polly, really interesting discussion of that painting, but there are these landscape references again, and also talking about colour and palette, and making me think about some of the comments Anne made about the Wind and Rain painting and these little hints of colour in the landscape. And do you want to say something about the painting of the Rockies, Mount St Donald in Canada, that you chose by Harry Marriott Burton?
I think I chose this because it just reminded me of the Rockies and a really lovely day. It wasn't in part of the Rockies that's in Canada as we see here, but you have to imagine you're in Denver, and the Rockies from where I was sitting are like a huge curtain in the far distance, and this reminds me of that. A great storm was going on over the Rockies. We were sitting in the sunshine, but it was that kind of distance, I suppose, of Rockies, flat landscape and the drama going on at a distance that really stuck in my mind. And this painting kind of reminded me of that, because the storm colours were not unlike the one that you see in this painting. Dramatic, incredible, tiny curtain far away, and yet you were very aware of the impact that had on the kind of climate that was occurring on either side, actually, of the Rockies.
And this is hanging in our family gallery display at the moment. This idea of landscape on a monumental scale that you're kind of looking at from a distance is, I think, quite a contrast to Polly's next choice, which is a painting by Ivor Hitchens.
Well, I was very thrilled to find this painting, because I have to admit that Ivor Hitchens is a painter whom I feel I've known all my life. I have a sense of fellow feeling, of fellow travelling. I meet his paintings with a great sense of almost wonder and almost vulnerability in myself. I think this is a superb painting. It's so economic and it's so decisive, and I feel it's an ongoing conversation that's gone on over many canvases, and it's through that long, subtle observation that this, in a way, very powerfully presented painting has developed. I feel as well that every brushstroke is of vital importance to the composition, and that if you'd taken it any further, it would have begun to become about a very, very different landscape experience. The proportion as well is extraordinary. It's 52 centimetres by 157 centimetres. So in a way he's taking the proportion of landscape to an extreme. And what he's in a way requiring us to do is our own dialogue has to be about moving into it and away from it. And in a way walking along it. We can't be a passive viewer. This next painting is by Lionel Wyllie. I was entranced when I was able to meet it physically, because it's a tiny painting. It's only 20 by 40 centimetres, an oil on canvas, and it's such an intimate experience. But for me, it very much speaks of the landscape that I walk. But in viewing it, when you begin to really give it time, and I began to do this by really half closing my eyes, you see the strange dark line of the horizon, which is not how we tend to perceive an horizon line, and realise that it's a dike, it's a built-up edge, it's an artificial protection, and that this marsh land actually lies lower than the sea, and that there is a sea out there, and it's a vast ocean. We can see in the right-hand side of the painting very, very delicate masts that represent the old sailing ship, and the evidence of a little funnel and the beginnings of the new steamships with the smoke blowing in the wind. And so you get this sense of the sort of ephemeral and the vulnerability of this marshland and the vastness and the power of that ocean, and that so much represents the marshland that I walk.
Shall we move to your next choice, Anne, which is a real contrast, or maybe it's not, I don't know what you're going to tell us about it, but it's by Margaret Benyon.
Yes, I think it perhaps does look rather different from some of the other ones that I've chosen. I like it because it's full of movement, it flickers, painted in the 60s, it I think represents that time actually so well. It is of its time. I like the way it's very formal, it's very precise, and it's an abstract, hence presumably Untitled, which is my favourite title of anything anyway, because it lets you look at it for what it is rather than determining that you're looking at wind and rain or something like that. For me, it speaks of water, light, colour. What really got me in the end was the flicker that has been achieved with that very precise composition is kind of echoed by the wavy edge of the piece itself. It hasn't been taken to the edge of the canvas. You've got that wavy line, which kind of is a line I use a lot in my work, a mark that means water in early writing. So that's how I read it, actually, that it is actually about the kind of subject that I like. And I suppose it's very tight and very formal, which is something I tend to get in my own work. And yet you create other things by being so strict and abstract.
There is a lot of movement in it, I think. It makes me think of a kaleidoscope, you know, one of those children's toys,
That's
perhaps,
right.
like I had one when I was little. And so it is very formal and structured, but you sort of get the sense that you could just tilt it and everything would shift.
Indeed, indeed.
And all the colours would shift. You've chosen something, Polly, as well, that's a more, well, abstract painting by Ian Stevenson. Again from the 60s, 1967.
And interesting what you were saying about having something untitled, because it made me realise, I looked at this title and realised it had no significance for the way I was choosing to read this. For me, it's all about extraordinary formal layering and construction. It's very much painting a surface and of great sort of control and subtlety. I've no idea, but I can only imagine this was quite a contemplative process, that he lived with this and built it and lived with it, and in a way a bit like the Ivor Hitchens, took it just as far as it needed to go and no further. When you look at it closely, so it has that sense of minutiae, but stand back from it, stand back from it and stand back from it, and it becomes all about something that's so distanced. It could be like a satellite photograph looking down onto a lit city at night or something. So it plays all these sort of visual games with us.
Well, we're going to come back to landscape now, and actually back to the present, really, although the painting was made in 2006, but also back to the castle, because it's a painting by Nick Hedderley called Nottingham, Late Afternoon, and I believe that the view was taken from the terrace outside the castle, looking out in one direction across the city. And I think you both like this painting. I don't know who wants to say something about it first.
Yes, I mean, having stood up there in the castle and looked down on the city and the landscape, it captures that beautifully, I think. And I love the proportion of ground to sky, and yet all round the edge somehow one is the same, because the yellow disappears and you go back to a kind of darkness above you. It's a very kind of encompassing painting, actually. And if you've experienced the view, it just catches it wonderfully. It makes you feel ever so small. The sun itself, I mean, who else has captured a sun setting as well as that? Probably Turner, but brilliant. I found that absolutely brilliant, and that shock of colour and the way it then sort of melds into the painting on either side. Just wonderful.
It's a very well considered painting. I like the way the sort of the body colour applies, just to give us a sense of the sort of glistening of that sort of urban landscape.
And I think the other thing is you really get the sense of how high up this castle is, which otherwise I've only experienced from coming into Nottingham on the train. And you see this, how high it is from a distance, and this is almost the reverse, isn't it? Looking down.
Is. Yeah, good moment. Just finish with something contemporary, and thank you both very much. All of the paintings that we've talked about are on display somewhere on the first floor of the castle at the moment, so visitors will be able to go off and look out for the Light and Line label and have a look at the paintings themselves.